Okay, so in this video on Gerald Stevens' Introduction to Greek Grammar textbook, we're going to cover Chapter 9, which is the subject of pronouns. Now, this can be a very confusing chapter for intro students because the paradigms are so overwhelming. If you've already flipped through the chapter, you're just going, wow, there's like 500 charts in this chapter, okay? So hopefully in this video I'll help you kind of get a handle on some of it and help you get a grip on what the pronoun system is all about. Now, what are pronouns? Well, pronouns are one of the 8 parts of speech again. It's one of the secondary parts. And what a pronoun basically does is it renames, takes the place of a noun. Sorry, it takes the place of a noun is the way he describes it. Now, here's what's important to notice. One important grammatical term to know, and that the term is antecedent. He talks about this on page 109 of which is the first page of chapter 9. Now, an antecedent is that noun that the pronoun is referring to. So, sometimes if I have a pronoun, if I say he hit the ball, you might ask the question, who is he? What you're really asking is, what is the antecedent of he? What is the noun that the he is replacing? Okay, that's what pronouns do. They take the place of nouns. They substitute for nouns, usually within a context. So if I say, Bill drove the car yesterday, and he drove fast. He hit a mailbox, and then he went out of control. Notice all the he. He went fast, he hit the mailbox, then he went out of control. If you don't hear the first sentence, Bill drove the car yesterday, you might be going, who's the he? You see, you're asking for what is the antecedent of the he? What noun is he taking place? I could say Bill every time. I say, yesterday Bill drove the car. Bill drove very fast. And Bill hit the mailbox. Then Bill lost control. But we don't tell stories like that. We usually name the noun, and then when we're going to repeat it, we use pronouns in its place, okay, to sort of substitute. So the antecedent is the original noun. And when you're translating in Greek, you're going to get pronouns all the time. This is really important. Here's a little exegesis. This is where a little exegesis inside. This is where this matters. When you have, you're translating through in Greek, and you're hitting a bunch of pronouns, you want to ask, what's the antecedent? Who's the they? Who's the he? I had Bible study just recently where this came up, and we were working through a passage with a group of people in my church, and the question, there's some difference of opinion came up. It was a pronoun they. Who's the they that Paul's referring to here? And so we had to look it back in the context to try to find what's the antecedent of the pronoun. So that's what he means by antecedent on page 109. Now here's what you need to know about pronouns in the Greek. The Greek language has a lot more specific pronouns than in English. The English has some pronoun. It's a lot more specific. It has pronouns and words that we don't have direct English equivalents to. And so there are actually more pronouns in the Greek, and there are also some idioms in the Greek language when it comes to pronouns that you kind of have to master, and I'll show a few of them here on the board. So there are, as he says, there are on the bottom of page 109, there are 12 pronoun categories, and they're organized into 4 pronoun systems. Okay, so this is how you got to think of pronouns. There's 4 major systems, 4 major kinds, and then each kind is some of them are going to have a few variations, but there are 4 major kinds. There's what we call personal pronouns, and there's a bunch of personal pronoun kinds or categories. There's demonstrative pronouns, there's relative pronouns, and then there's interrogative pronouns. Those are the major 4 types of pronouns, and then each one of those is going to have some subsets within it. So when the main he gives you in table 9.1 the personal pronoun system and the relative pronoun system. For example, personal pronouns include what we normally think of like I, he, she, it. It also includes a whole list there: intensive, reflexive, intensive, possessive. I'm just going in order in the chart in table 9.1. Intensive, possessive, reflexive, reciprocal, indefinite, and negative. These are all what we call personal pronouns. Okay. Now, what he's going to do on the next few pages is page 110 all the way over to page 117. You see where it ends in negative pronouns? That's all your personal pronouns. So one of your 4 systems of pronouns is the personal pronoun, and you got all those different types that he's listed in table 9.1. He's just going to give them to you. on pages 110 to the top of page 118. Then on the middle of page 118, he's going to give you the second system, which is demonstrative. And you notice there's not as many of those. And then you get the third system, the relative system, on page 119. And that goes all the way to page 122. And then on the bottom of page 122 and 123, you're going to get the fourth and final system. That's called the interrogative system. Now, there are so many pronouns to the Greek language that in order to try to help you kind of digest it slowly, what Stevens does is he breaks this chapter up. And he says very specifically, where does he say this? You need to catch this. He says it on page 109. The chapter material is to be divided over several lessons. You're only actually going to do part of this chapter, and he's going to signal that to you on page 116. So notice the bottom of page 116, he says with an arrow, note, for chapter 9, now go to homework. So I'm going to do my best to explain through chapter 9, but what's going to happen is you're basically going to be introduced to all the in your vocabulary up to that point, all the pronouns up to page, what did I just say that page was? 116, the bottom of page 116. That means everything that the pronouns that come on page 117, 118, 119, 120, 121, those pronouns, which are different vocabulary words, are going to be introduced in chapters 10 and chapter 11. You're going to actually see them in the vocabulary. Here's the thing you need to know about pronouns. There's going to be a few idioms to it that I'm going to show you the idioms in this video, but the rest of it is really memorization of vocabulary words. Remember what I said at the beginning? Vocabulary, vocabulary, vocabulary is the key to the Greek language, and mastering pronouns is just learning the vocabulary. And I for one, as an intro Greek student, found this to be the most difficult. In fact, to this day, I still run over some of these pronouns that you don't see quite often and go, okay, what kind of pronoun was that again? And I have to go back and look it up and remind myself. So this one's going to be a tough one. You're not going to get all this chapter. You're going to get it in bits and pieces. So let's start with the personal pronoun system, which he talks about in page 10 and page 110 and 111. And again, I'm not going to go through every detail of this chapter because what most of this information is he's trying to help you to understand that these pronouns are inflected just like adjectives, just like nouns, and they're using the same declension ending. So he's going to have these little variations all over the place. He's going to say, okay, remember that this noun has this declension ending. So for example, look at the bottom of page 111. He says, this observation is conditional. That is, some pronouns will express the final nu on the end. In such cases, the pronoun simply looks normal to you, as expected with the omicron nu ending of the second declension neuter. And it can be easily identified. A lot of the stuff in this are just comments about the endings. Here's how you grab the big picture of pronouns. Pronouns are basically using the same noun endings you already learned in chapter 4, chapter 5, and chapter 7, first, second, and third declension. And a lot of what he's going to explain to you about these individual personal pronouns and stuff are the type of endings they're using and some of the variations. But if you know your first, second, third, second declension, you're going to nail pretty much most of the time. There's some variations that'll trip you up. You're going to nail most of the pronouns. The place you're going to get tripped up with pronouns is the vocabulary because there's so many of them. And if you don't learn them as vocabulary terms, you're just not going to be able to translate them, even if you know the ending. So that's where you're going to get tripped up. So for example, let's start with personal pronouns. The personal system, these are the pronouns you most often are familiar with. The I, the you, the he, she, or it, they. These are the first, second, third personal pronouns. So in Greek, just like in English, you have some different pronouns. We have he, she, it, they, you, or I. And then you've got, in English, if the first person pronoun I is in the subject, it looks like an I. What if it's the object? We don't say you hit I, or pass me, pass I the cup. We say pass me. Notice me in English is the objective or direct object. We might say accusative or direct or indirect object, the dative form of the I. So if you were learning English and you were learning pronouns, you'd have to learn, well, the letter I is the first person singular pronoun, but that's only when it's subject, like in the nominative if you're thinking Greek. But when it's the object of the verb, you don't write I, you write me. And you go, and if you were you were trying to learn English, that person would go, or someone were trying to learn English from you, that person would say, well, how do I know? How do I understand that? What would you say to them? Well, you got to kind of know the vocabulary word. Just know me as the direct object form of I. Well, in the Greek, it somewhat works like that, but there's a lot of inflection, a lot more inflection than in the English. And this is what you see in table 9.2, 9.3, 9.4, 9.5. So in 9.1, you have ego. You see that? Nominative, singular. See the chart, the very first one, epsilon, looks like this. Right there. See that one? Ego. That's the nominative singular ending of the first person pronoun, I, and it's translated I. The plural is hemes. Go over, you see that? The plural, hemes, with the, looks like this. See that there? Hemes. That's the we. That's the plural of the first person singular. Notice the spelling changes. So in these personal pronouns, you're going to have a singular form, and then you're going to have a plural form. And that's a lot of what he explains to you in the verbiage there. You have a singular of I, a plural of I, which is translated we. And notice you have the same cases: nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. And in this one, there's not too much variation. If you recognize ego as first person singular I, and that you just learn as vocabulary, you'll see it so much. Notice that it's not totally anything brand new. Notice the paradigm. Look at the genitive singular of I in table 9.2. Mo, mu. I'm sorry, mu. I forgot it's a diphthong. Mu. Okay. Notice that omicron upsilon ending. That's the genitive singular, the second declension. You've seen that before. How about now? The dative looks a little odd to you, but it's got an iota. So you know when you have the iota, there's the dative ending. Notice the plural endings: humes, humode, omicron nu. I'm sorry, omega nu. When you have the omega nu, we know that's genitive. We know it from second declension that's genitive plural. Same thing in this pronoun. Notice the second person pronoun: singular su, soy, and se. The sigma epsilon is the accusative. See that in table 9.3. Notice you have a plural ending. One of the things I'm going to tell you under that chart, this is what's interesting about Greek. In English, you don't have a plural second person pronoun. We just don't have one. We have you singular, but if I were standing in front of a class of 10 people and I said, you turn to page 112, how do you know I'm talking to a singular person or to the whole class? Well, really you don't. Not from the construction of the pronoun. I could mean you in particular. I could be pointing to one person, say, you turn to page 112. Or I could say, you turn to page 112. It'd mean the whole class. It's the same word, you. So we only have one form for both singular and plural. Sometimes if you're from the South, you say y'all. Y'all turn to page 112. You know, that's the way we turn it into a plural. And we actually, what that is a contraction of, we have to add a word. If we want to make it clear that the you is plural, we say you all turn to page 112. You have to add a word. Well, in Greek, what's interesting about table 9.3, you're learning some cool exegesis here. Some vocabulary that's going to help you in your exegesis, I should say. The Greek has a plural form for the you. Now, this is interesting. Go back and start looking at some Greek text, and you'll be shocked by how many of the yous are actually plural in the New Testament and not singular. Okay, we normally think of them in the singular because we're very individualistic in the Western mind. So we're reading when it says you do this, you do that. We don't realize it's talking to a community, oftentimes, or to a plural you. So whether the you is singular or plural is vague in English, but in Greek, the you, whether it's singular or plural, is crystal clear because they're two separate vocabulary words, and you see that in table 9.3. Now, how do you learn all those? Well, you learn them by vocabulary. You might learn the endings along with that, so you know that omicron, for example, in 9.3, the plural you is upsilon mu, and then the various endings. You'll just get used to seeing that, okay? Then you have third person masculine in table 9.4, interesting. Third person neuter. So this is what's interesting about and on page 112 in table 9.6, third person feminine. This is another interesting thing about the third person plural. So we have a he, she, or it, right? Gender in English pronoun. That's what that singular column is. So in table 9.4, nominative, autos, nominative singular, that's he. Skip down to 9.5. Look at table 9.5 on page 111. You see that singular nominative, auta, it's the alpha, upsilon, tau, omicron, alta. That's the neuter for it. So notice you have a different spelling, an actual different word for it, just like we do in English. And then you have the equivalent of she on page 112 in table 9.6, in that nominative singular, alte. And then the different cases, depending on what it's doing in the sentence. If that pronoun is in the possessive, like her, it'd be altes. If it's the object, it'd be in the accusative, altain. If it's the direct object, it'd be alte with that little omicron, a subscript iota under the eta there in table 9.6. Here's the interesting thing about third person. In English, another interesting thing, in the they, we don't have gender for they. So we could say, they are over there and referring to a group of women. It's the word they. We could say, they over there and refer to a group of men. Or we even could refer to an inanimate group of objects like books, and we could say, they are about the Civil War. What are those books about? They're about the Civil War. Notice they refers to it, books, in that sense, a neuter noun. They could refer to men, they could refer to women. There's no gender to our English third person pronoun, but in Greek, there is. Each one has a different ending, a different spelling, okay? And so you have different endings for the third person pronoun in Greek, which is unique and makes exegesis very interesting. It means in the Greek text, it's not ambiguous. You know what the gender of that pronoun is, because if you know your endings there, okay? And you notice, again, look at those endings. For example, look at table 9.6. You're just learning vocabulary, not learning new endings. Don't be afraid of this. Not learning new endings. Look at the endings in table 9.6. What do these look like? They look like first declension endings. You've seen these. That ace, a with the subscript iota, and then ain in the singular column in that table 9.6, those endings there, that's the eta pure ending of first declension. Then notice the plural endings. Those are the plural endings of the first declension. So you're not learning new endings. You're just learning some new vocabulary in that sense of what these pronouns are. Now here's some idioms, some translation issues on page 112 and 113. In Greek, there are two basic idioms he's going to introduce you to with these personal pronouns. One is the subject emphasis, and the other one is genitive of possession. Subject emphasis is this. He's going to explain it there. What he's basically going to say is that when you have a pronoun before a verb, the pronoun technically is unnecessary to communicating. Why? Because the pronoun or subject's in the verb. So when you have a pronoun preceding a verb like that, it usually, if it's he says that since the subject is being emphasized, well, he'll tell you if you have the pronoun before the verb, then you have an idiom of emphasis of the subject. Let me give you this example. This is an example he gives. This is I, the pronoun for I, and or but. Notice the conjunction de, which is always post-positive. It always comes second in the sentence. Lego human. Okay, Lego human. So you get this accusative ending because it's the object of Lego. I say to you. I say to you. Now, where would this one come in? This one would be on, I'm sorry, I said accusative. I meant dative. It's got the iota. See, I mislocated. It's getting late there. Look at table 9.3, second person. Notice the dative plural ending, and you see that right there. It's your human, dative. Okay, so it's the dative plural, and it's plural, so it's y'all. This is a group, y'all. So I say to you all, plural, and then you have this. But here's the point in the subject emphasis. The Greek writer doesn't need to write this. Why? Because the I is right there in the ending. We learned this in verb endings. Right? This is the O, ace, a, omineti. This is the O. This is singular. I can give you this word and say, translate that. You could write, I say. So why do you need the ego? You don't. It's right here. So what he's saying here is there is an idiom in Greek language that the writer writes the pronoun out here when it's already right there and there's no other subject in the sentence. What this is telling me is that it's emphasizing. It's like saying, I say to you. You hear the difference? Not just I say to you, but I say to you. You've heard it said, but I say to you. See, it's emphasizing the I, or whatever the pronoun is. If this were a third person is a. If this were lege, okay, and I had my third person personal pronoun here, it would be he says to you. He says to you. Okay, emphasizing. And you go, well, here's the interesting thing. Here's something cool about Greek. You're already learning some interpretation, some exegesis here. You don't get this in English. How would you translate this? How would you translate this part in English? Forget you have this. You would say, but I say to you. How do you translate this into English? Same way. But I say to you. So how do you know that the writer is emphasizing the subject? The only way to know it is to see it in Greek. If you see this in English, you're never going to know there's an idiom going on here, and he's emphasizing the subject. So that's a pretty cool exegesis thing. The other thing is genitive of possession. Here's the thing. Greek has actually possessive pronouns. You're going to see these on page 114. See the chart table 9.7, possessive pronoun summary? Those are possessive pronouns. So they have a pronoun for my, yours, his, ours. They have separate words for that. Here's the interesting thing. In Koine Greek, one of the differences from previous classical Greek, we start to see this more and more in Koine Greek, more and more, and we see it in the New Testament. They had an idiom that they started to use, and that is they started to use the third personal pronoun in the genitive case in order to indicate possession. And he gives you an example right here. I wrote part of it down here. Mark 1:19 on page 113. His brother, John, his brother. John, his brother. So notice this is Delphan, brother, autu, his. This is the third person personal pronoun, and you see it. Its antecedent is here masculine, so it's going to be in the masculine, and you see it on table 9.4. It is the genitive singular ending. It's the third person pronoun, genitive singular ending. But notice what's happened here, and this is what happens in Koine. You've seen it in the New Testament. Instead of writing his, which is a separate, there's a Greek word for that, and you see it in table 9.7. This would be idious. You see that masculine singular third far left column in table 9.7. Iota, delta, iota, omicron, sigma. He could have written that right here and not used this. But this began a sort of way of writing in Koine as a substitute, and this is one of the signature marks of of Koine Greek, and he uses the third person, his brother, rather than using the more classical Greek of the pronoun. And so when you see those possessive pronouns in table 9.7 a lot in the Greek, this is kind of a it's a bit of a classical thinker, a little bit more of an educated Greek thinker using those, because this is the sort of Koine street Greek going on here. Okay, so he's just showing you those idioms. The next set of pronouns is intensive pronouns, and some of the idioms you need to know here. He's going to explain in number 1 and number 2. Reflexive pronouns are not new pronouns to use. They're actually third-person pronouns being utilized in conjunction with nouns. And you have two different functions, the reflexive intensification and adjectival intensification. In other words, in reflexive intensification, when you have a pronoun that's an authoress with a noun in the neighborhood and they're in conjunction here, concord, they're in concord, what you have here is reflexive intensification, and it's translated with the word self, depending on the nature of the program of the pronoun. So this is that even, this is the creation, even the creation, and you translate this itself. You go, wait a minute, I learned that vocabulary word as her, but this is an idiom. So yes, technically that's the word her, but when it's an authoress, no article, and it's in concord with a nearby noun, that's there you have this articular noun, then they're in concord, then what's happening here is it's an intensification. It's reflexive. The creation itself, in that even the creation itself is the way he translates that. And so, by the way, if you try to translate it woodenly, it wouldn't make any sense. That's one of the ways you know you're dealing with an idiom here. And then her, the creation. That doesn't make any sense. So here's the third person pronoun functioning with an idiom. It's a function. Okay, so you have a pronoun functioning in multiple different ways. The second way is an adjectival intensification. And again, the third person pronoun is being reused in Koine Greek, and it's beginning, and it's what it's doing here is it's in concord. This time with an article. It has the article and it's a concord with a noun. Then it's translated as the same, and it's identifying. Okay, it's identifying the word, and here is whatever the noun is. Here it's the word. So here's the thing: I've got a third person personal pronoun in concord with a noun, and it's an authoress. It's intensification, the creation itself. When I have a third person personal pronoun and concord with a noun, here is his word, but it has the article this time, and it's articular. Then it's the same word. The same word. You might want to be, if you were translated woodenly, it would almost be like to his word or something like that, but it's really to him. It would actually be to him the word, and it almost doesn't make any sense. To him the word, but really it's because it has the article and it's with a noun in concord. Here it's the same word, and it's identifying the very same word is the idea. Okay, so that's, and then on page 114 you have possessive pronouns. He's going to talk about how they are formed. Here's what you need to know about table 9.7. They're vocabulary words. You need to learn them as vocabulary words. He's not giving you the whole breakdown and paradigm chart. He's going to tell you what declensions they follow. But you need to learn them as vocabulary words. And they're listed in your vocabulary list in the back already. So turn to page 129. Notice emos as a masculine singular, first person singular in table 9.7. See that? Epsilon, mu, omicron, sigma. Look, notice page 129. You're going to have emos. It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth word down. And you have it in its masculine, feminine, and neuter form. See that? Matching, go back to chart 9.7. Matching your chart. And that's it. Now, that's in its nominative form. It's going to follow the various declensions. Some of these pronouns will use will use different declensions. But the bottom line is, if you know your declension endings, you're going to be able to locate it. What you need to know is the vocabulary words. So emos, emoi, eman, that needs to be a vocabulary card. You learn that as possessive. My. And the difference between mas and moi, I'm just going on that first chart here. This would be, let me see if I can hold the book up. This would be this chart right here on table 9.7. I'm just looking at these words right here. Those are my, those first three blocks. Those are my. In these, you notice the masculine, neuter, plural. They have the different singular, masculine, neuter, and feminine genders have this singular and plural for each. And mas, and moi, and man, and ma, and me, and my. See that? And those are all the nominative forms. So basically, possessive pronouns, you're learning vocabulary. That's the thing. Just know your vocabulary list in the back of your book, and you're going to have that chart. And just know that those are going to be inflected depending on its case, nominative, genitive, dative, or accusative. And then he's going to talk about possessive pronouns and the plural concord and how they work in concord with their nouns on 115. Your other pronouns that you're going to be introduced to are the reflexive nouns on page 116 and the reciprocal pronouns on bottom of page 116. Again, what are you learning here? You're learning all these as vocabulary. All of these are going to be on your vocabulary list. He's going to explain some of the variations. So, for example, he's going to tell you that in the reciprocal pronouns, only masculine and plural. The only three that you need to know in the New Testament are listed right there for you. Just know those three as vocabulary words, and you'll have the pronouns. So, yes, these are technically inflected, and he's going to show you inflection patterns in table 9.9, but they're just using first, second, third declension endings. That's why I said in chapter 4, 5, and 7, you need to know those endings. It affects your articles, it affects your adjectives, and now we're seeing it affects your pronouns too. So you learn your pronoun as a vocabulary word, and you learn your declension endings, and you have the inflection pattern. And then you have indefinite pronouns on the top of page 117. So again, I'm not going through every one of these. These reflexes are himself, herself, itself. He gives you examples there in the middle of page 116. The reciprocal are to one another. You translate that of one another, to one another, or one another, depending on its case. Page 117 is indefinite pronouns. And really, here is where you stop in chapter 9, because everything that comes after this, you're going to get introduced those as vocabulary, because pronoun is vocabulary. Pronoun is vocabulary. You've got to just learn vocabulary words. And he's going to give you some of these in chapter 10 and chapter 11. So what you want to learn is everything up to page 116. 117, go through it. Go ahead and read it. Well, he says to stop here and do your homework. It wouldn't hurt you to read through it. But what you'll want to do, if you want to do it this way, this is fine. When you get to chapter 10 and you see these pronouns in your vocabulary list, go back and read this section, and he'll explain it. And basically all he's going to do in pages 117 and following is follow through the rest of the personal pronouns, then which are the negative and indefinite, like a certain one or anything, and then the demonstrative on page 118, and there's two forms of that. There's what they call proximate and then remote. Proximate are like this and these. In other words, when you want to refer to something with a pronoun and you want to say that they're close to the speaker, it's this and these. Get this book, get these books, or get those books. They're remote, they're distant from the speaker. And notice in Greek, just like in English, they're separate words. This and these, that or those. That or those are over there. This or these are very close. That's what he means in proximity to the speaker. And just like in English, in Greek, you have different pronouns for each of those. It's vocabulary. And your pronouns he's going to give you for those are demonstrative. They're pointing to, okay, that's the idea there, are given in table 9.12. You don't have to learn those right now. Wait till you get them in the next, I think it's in chapter 10 or 11. You're going to get those, and you're going to go back here, read this section, and you're going to learn those as vocabulary. We're just going to write them on vocabulary cards and learn them. You're not going to learn them as paradigms. Why? Again, you've already learned the paradigm endings, first, second, third, declension. You've already learned them. So you're just learning vocabulary words here, knowing that these are going to be inflected in the text, depending on whether or not they're nominative, whether they're genitive, whether they're accusative or dative, something like that. And again, all these pronouns are going to be different. Relative pronouns on page 119. Is there anything else I want to say? Correlative. And then the interrogative. These relative pronouns, they function. They're a special class. Here's what you need to know about relative pronouns. They function as a special class in the sense that they're like conjunctions in that they introduce clauses. And you see examples. And the chart is 913, table 913, the bottom page 119. You just got to learn those as vocabulary. But notice the examples on page 120. They start conjunctions. Whoever, to whom, which. And they usually, again, we say, if I said, the days are coming in which they will say. If I just started with in which they will say, you would be asking what's the antecedent of which, because which is a pronoun pointing back to something. And in that example, that's his fourth example on page 120 there. And the days are coming in which. What is the which? The days. The days that are coming. That's the which to which he's referring. Okay, so all these pronouns have antecedents. Even these demonstrative pronouns and relative pronouns, they have antecedents. Okay, you just got to find in the sentence. And they'll always be in concord with what they're referring to, their antecedents. So he gives you the vocabulary in table 914 of these, in table 913 of relative pronouns, which start clauses. And then you have the indefinite relative pronouns, which things, which, and whoever. Okay, then correlative is a whole nother set. This is such, so much, as, or as much. Different vocabulary, which you'll get in chapter 10. The last kind is the interrogative. These are who or from whom, those kind of translations. These are question kind of interrogatives, and you have different vocabulary. Look at the 9.16. Tis, tinis, ti, tina. You get the masculine, feminine forms and the neuter forms, and those are going to be declension. Those are nominative forms you're looking at. He just doesn't give you the whole chart because you already know those endings. Okay, so that's the who, what, the which, what, why. That's how you write. That's the tis. Okay. Now, for a summary, a big picture stand back of all the pronouns, look at page 123, 124, 125. He puts everything, all these pronouns in their systems in a nice little chart. So basically, if you know that chart, all those vocabulary, And you don't have to learn them all now. Just learn up to page that he tells you, where he makes that little mark on page 116. Just really focus on page 116. Then when you get these vocabularies in later chapters, refer back to it. Just remember, it uses all pronouns. Are going to use some variation of the first, second, third declension, and you have to learn them by vocabulary. Think of pronouns as vocabulary learning words. All right? And that's the system of Greek pronouns.